Please join me in welcoming our first keynote speaker, Patrick Harvie MSP, Minister for Zero Carbon Buildings, Active Travel and Tenants Rights. Put your hands together, Patrick Harvie.
And I think you can imagine my anxiety at having to follow quite such a high-energy introduction. Thank you very much for having me along today. It's a real pleasure to come and talk to you about some of the aspects of the challenge ahead of us, those falling within my own remit, in particular, how we continue to decarbonise our homes, buildings, towns, cities, communities, our built environment. And it is obviously wonderful to see events like this bringing together so many people across a wide range of organisations working on these challenges. Let me just start by taking the step back that I usually do and just recognise that whatever some of those you, I think, were referring to in the introduction who are starting to drag this whole issue into the space of culture wars, whatever the GB News presenters of this world would like to have us believe, the climate emergency is, of course, the greatest challenge of our age, perhaps of any age. There is progress. There is good progress. Scotland has halved its emissions since 1990, but the most challenging part of the journey still lies ahead. Now, we've got a legal obligation, in my view also a moral obligation, to become net zero by 2045, and that still means a huge range of challenging action across transport, land use, industry, and much more, and in particular, in terms of my remit, heat. We're committed to meeting that 2045 target, not just because the law says that we have to, or even in response to the climate emergency, but because in doing so, we will be best serving the interests of the people that the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government are here to serve. There's the opportunity to free people from dependence on fossil fuels that bring with them volatile prices that drive fuel poverty, and also to free the world from reliance on often brutal and authoritarian regimes that control so much of the global fossil fuel market. But the task of doing so is huge, and we've still got a long way to go to get back on track with those legally binding targets and to meet that target of 2045. We are not where we should be at this point in history. And that's partly because we didn't do, as a country, Scotland or the UK, we didn't do what some of our more sensible European neighbours, including in cold northern countries, did by changing the way that we build our homes and our communities and our energy systems decades ago. Some of our neighbours are half a century ahead of us on a lot of this stuff, and we've got a lot of catching up to do. But we can also learn from the experience they've had over those decades. We have to demand of ourselves a transformation in the way that we heat our homes and buildings, decarbonising our cities, our built environment, and it's simply an unavoidable part. There is no path to net zero that doesn't include an ambitious agenda on heat in buildings. Now, you're probably aware, I certainly hope you're aware, that the Scottish Government set out consultations just recently. First, proposals for a heat in buildings bill, legislation to be introduced later this year and debated in this session of Parliament. And separately, a twin-track consultation, one on the social housing net zero standard. Both of these consultations set out the detail of our plans for energy efficiency as well as decarbonising heat, the transition away from fossil fuels across our buildings through a balance of legislation, regulation and support. The consultations both closed recently to responses on the 8th of March, and I'm very grateful to everyone who took the time to give us their views. We are putting regulation at the heart of the heat transition because we believe that that will give the clarity and certainty, a long-term direction of travel to businesses, to householders and public bodies, and to industry because that's what they tell me they need if they're going to invest in the long term, in the skills, the capacity, the supply chain, and so on. But regulation, although it's going to play a critically important part, is only one part of a much bigger picture. Funding is crucially important, and meeting these targets is going to require a substantial amount of investment to support the transition. Now, from public funds, we've committed to investing £1.8 billion over the course of this parliamentary session on the heat and buildings agenda, both on energy efficiency and the heat transition. And that includes the £200 million social housing net zero heat fund. That's available to public bodies who are registered social landlords. And the Green Public Sector Estate Decarbonisation Scheme, also making £200 million available to support public sector energy efficiency and decarbonisation. That public sector scheme has already funded a huge range of projects, from further education colleges to hospitals to police stations. Just to give you a couple of examples, £1.3 million has been provided to support the energy efficiency of 18 police houses, which are required to support police officers to work in remote and rural locations. So really critical to continuing to deliver an essential public service. We're also providing approximately £4.2 million to support various energy efficiency, clean heating and renewable technologies at 12 health centres across the Orkney Islands, transforming the way they use their buildings. Scotland's Heat Network Fund is also making £300 million of capital grant funding available to support the rollout of clean heat networks. And I've had the pleasure just recently of visiting a project that was awarded funding and seen the benefits of that support firsthand. The City of Edinburgh Council were awarded £4.1 million for the Western Villages Heat Network project. That will provide low-carbon heating and hot water to well over 400 new build properties at the Granton waterfront development. And as well as that capital fund, we've also got a heat network support unit, and that aims to address the challenges that the public sector faces in the pre-capital stages of developing heat networks and providing guidance and expertise so that projects can come to the point where they're ready to apply for capital funding. And the support unit has provided development support to 28 projects already that have the potential value of £280 million. Now, also on heat networks, you may be aware that in the last session of the Scottish Parliament, the Heat Networks Act was passed. That's the first legislation of its kind in the UK, setting ambitious targets for the amount of heat to be supplied in Scotland through networks. There's a real opportunity to see heat networks grow to meet their full potential in Scotland. But achieving that is going to require ambitious action, and that's why we prioritised the development of regulations and guidance that will require the identification of heat network zones by the public sector and local authorities. And I certainly want to encourage local authorities to complete their reviews for possible heat network zones so that we have a clearer picture of the opportunities for heat networks across Scotland's communities, including the role that public buildings will play. That includes using resources efficiently and maximising the use of surplus and waste heat. At the moment, that's a resource that's just going completely to waste. Now, to achieve net zero, there needs to be thinking that is strategic and on a wider scale across regions. That's why nearly £2.5 million was provided to local authorities to enable them to produce their local heat and energy efficiency strategies. That local planning has got a really critical role to play here. And the wider public sector is key to the development and implementation of those local strategies. They can help identify the opportunities for collaboration between the public and the private sector to decarbonise heat, improve energy efficiency, and tackle fuel poverty at the same time. And these local strategies also have a really important role to play in, as I said, identifying the areas that are going to be most suitable early on for the development of heat networks. and public buildings, as well as those in the private sector, may play a really important role as anchor loads on those networks, helping to make them viable and helping to make them investable. Several local authorities have already published their local strategies. Others are working at pace to complete them. And it has been really inspiring, actually, to see the different ideas and different paths, the creativity that's coming forward to drive forward decarbonisation of heat, as well as better energy efficiency right across Scotland. So I want to encourage all public bodies to engage with your local authorities about those strategies, use them as a tool to support you in your own path to decarbonising buildings. Now, achieving these net zero targets and the role of heat, as I said at the start, is particularly challenging. Knowing how to tackle it is, in many ways, the first challenge that we have to get over. That's why the Scottish Government began drafting new statutory guidance for public bodies in early 2023. We were required to do that under the Climate Change Act, but doing that is putting support to support putting climate change duties into practice, helping public bodies know what they have to do to decarbonise their buildings. Development of that guidance has been undertaken collaboratively with the public sector via the Sustainable Scotland Network, trying to co-develop that with the organisations that will have to use the guidance. And our officials have worked across a wide range of stakeholder organisations and with expert individuals to make sure that we inform the development of that draft guidance and make sure that we're sharing relevant case studies that people can learn from. The duties from the Climate Change Act require public bodies to reduce emissions when they exercise their public functions, help deliver as well the Scottish National Adaptation Programme and act in the most sustainable way. But to know how they need that guidance to be there. So the first full draft is nearing completion. Am I getting close to time?
You know.
I took that as a wee signal. I'll accelerate. So we're going to be continuing that over the weeks and months ahead. Now, I know that this morning's session focuses on how we are going to tackle this challenge in our built environment, and the right planning frameworks need to be in place as well to support the transition. And the National Planning Framework 4 in Scotland signals the key priorities about the where and the what of development at a national level, and it's combined with national planning policy that addresses the how of development planning so that we manage this change. And there's a whole suite of national planning policies that accompany that to make sure that reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a cross-cutting objective. And that's supported by a delivery programme that includes a commitment to prepare planning and climate change guidance to support developers as well, so that they know what they have to do to get the siting and design of development proposals right. And we're taking that forward with an expert group. Improving the resourcing and performance of the planning system are critical priorities as well, and we're taking forward a range of measures to achieve that, and we'll shortly be publishing another public consultation looking specifically at how we resource the planning system, on how we can make sure that our planning system is equipped properly to deliver the ambitions that are set out in NPF 4. So to draw this to a conclusion, yes, our targets to decarbonise cities, our towns, our regions and our whole built environment is hugely ambitious because it has to be. I'm convinced more now than ever before that climate-friendly urban environments make for better places for people to live, cleaner, safer, less congested, and more locally responsive. And doing this work offers a huge economic opportunity for Scotland as well. That's the cause on which we're all engaged here today. Every organisation, every individual taking part in an event like this has a contribution and a critically important role to play, bringing your own knowledge and insight. And as we collaborate and share learning, we'll help to make sure that we're better able to achieve those shared objectives. So I hope you have an engaging, a creative and a participative day. I'm looking forward to your questions and thank you once again for the invitation to take part.
I won't dwell for too long, as you know we're keeping to time. However, I would like to say, Mr. Harvie, that I've seen many, many ministers at the conferences I have hosted and chaired over the years, last 12 years. And you are the first that I've ever seen say, do you know what, I'm going to stay for the Q&A session. We're very used to people like you coming, saying great things, but having other commitments. And I think what you show is a commitment to the people in this room by staying and taking their questions. And I'm very, very grateful for that.